Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in for this presentation here. My name's Kevin Fraley and I'm a fish ecologist for the Wildlife Conservation Society. Recording this talk for the community of Point Hope. I was just recently here in June 2026 up in the community to give this presentation, but due to community events it had to be canceled, so I'm recording it here so folks can see the results of this study that we've been working on for a couple seasons now. So I'm going to turn off my camera here and get into the talk. Okay, so on the front slide here, this is actually a photo of one of our fieldwork trips last year. This was July 2025, floating on the North River or the Ipawik River. And so we were floating this river and the Kukpuk to catch grayling and to test their muscle tissues for contaminants to see if they're healthy to eat. That's kind of the background of the study. And I'll go into this in much more detail coming up here. So first, a little bit of introduction about myself and my organization. So the Wildlife Conservation Society is who I work for, or WCS, as they're also called. And they were formed in 1895 as the New York Zoological Society. And it's this global nonprofit organization with the goals to protect wildlife and wild places. We do this through science and through outreach, not through suing and litigation like many environmental groups do, but rather this is a group full of scientists and conservationists, and a lot of what we want to study is how subsistence species are doing, how important species in important landscapes like the Brooks Range, which is an international, it's recognized as an internationally important landscape because of how vast it is, how important it is for the Arctic and for people, for subsistence, and how free from development, largely, it is up to this point. So the WCS has these zoos and aquariums in New York State, in New York City, and so that's sort of the core of the operations, and that's where the headquarters are. But there's also these global offices around the world. So we have offices in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America. We have our small office in Fairbanks, which I'm a part of, and then even an office in Whitehorse, Canada. Also, in the past, we've done work in Russia, not quite as much now, but also over in Eastern Asia there too. So the Fairbanks office, it's called the Arctic Beringia Program. And it's a pretty small group. So I'm the fish biologist there, and I've been with the organization since 2020. And then we have bird and mammal scientists, social scientists, veterinary medicine scientists, as well as a variety of other administrative and oversight staff. And on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see some of the more global operations, like collaring elephants in Africa and the zoos and the aquariums in New York. But in the center and to the right there, you can see more of what the Arctic Beringia program gets up to. Those center two photos are out in Northwest Alaska, and WCS has been working out there, mostly with the native village of Kotzebue and the Park Service in Kotzebue, to study coastal lagoons along the southern Chukchi Sea. And I'll show a map of which lagoons we go to next. But we go out there and have done since 2012 or so, almost every year, to see how the fish populations are doing, how the abundance of those fish is, the species diversity, the water quality, and just look for observations and changes in habitat. And so that's a couple of those photos there. That top photo you might recognize, that's Mapsarack Lagoon, which is up towards Cape Thompson. And so we've done some work with lagoons up near approaching Point Hope too, and I'll point those out a little bit on the next couple slides as well. Besides the fisheries work, you can see on the right-hand side some of the other activities that our Arctic Beringia program has done or continues to do, including collaring wolverines with GPS up on the Arctic slope and tracking them around, looking at how seabirds and water birds and shorebirds are doing in Prudhoe Bay and other areas in Northwest Alaska, and even getting into the wood bison reintroduction conversation and also just sort of bison ecology in general in Alaska. So those are some of the big things that are happening now. So just talking briefly about what WCS has been doing in Northwest Alaska in the past, since 2012, is visiting these coastal lagoons. And so we put out different nets, and we test the water for pH, temperature, algae blooms, this sort of thing. And we mostly we check the fish, measure them, look at the different species, sometimes take samples, like for the project I'll talk about today, we'll take muscle samples to see if there's contaminants in the fish tissues to make sure they're healthy to eat. And so we do that mostly in Cape Krusenstern National Monument lagoons, but I'll point out some other places where we've been to. So here's sort of the array of lagoons in this area, and the ones that we've gone to have been Kukpuk and Ikpek down in Bering Land Bridge on the Seward Peninsula. Then we go to Krusenstern, Kotlik, and Tasechek, north of Kotzebue there a lot in the Cape Krusenstern National Monument. And then we visited, not too often, but we visited Kemigrak, Akoviknak, Singoak, Mapsarak, and Atosik for fish studies as well, most recently in 2021. And we came up to Point Hope in 2023, I believe, or 2022, to give a community meeting and a presentation about what we found in those lagoons. Some people might remember going to that talk. If you have any questions about that, let me know. I can send people information about what we found in those lagoons too. And as you guys know, especially in those Cape Krusenstern Monument lagoons, there's this huge variety of fish, which is really, really exciting. You never know what might come up in your nets. And we use different nets like gill nets, pike nets, beach seines, and even angling, especially for the trout, the Dolly Varden, because they can see the nets really well, so they're a little more easier to catch with angling. But yeah, all sorts of different freshwater species like the grayling and the Alaska blackfish on the top left there, and then some different salmon species, lots of the different whitefish, sheefish, broad whitefish, humpback whitefish, and the marine species like tomcod, sculpins, and Arctic flounder. Of course, the species that are in each lagoon changes. Further north towards Point Hope, there's maybe fewer of these species, but closer down to Kotzebue Sound, where there's all those big rivers coming in and stuff, there's a lot more of the whitefish and the salmon and that sort of thing. Yeah, and so just outlining, these are the lagoons we've been to in your neck of the woods here, and we went in 2018 and 2021. And this was the visit we did to Point Hope in, I believe it was February of 2023. And so we talked to folks here. We did some interviews about whitefish, had lots of door prizes and things to give out. And I was hoping to do that again for this recent trip to Point Hope, but it didn't work out that way. But hopefully we'll get back out at some point to hold a community meeting where people can talk about what they're seeing with the fish and have any questions for us. And actually this meeting was where basically we came up with the idea to fund this and to work on this study looking at the Kukpuk River grayling, because we noticed that there was a lot of the rusty seeps, this orange water that's flowing into the river drainage, which I'll talk about and show a little bit more as we move along here. Okay, so jumping into the study. So this study was funded by the Bureau of Land Management, and basically, was to look at the grayling in Point Hope here, which, as we know, are very important. People in Kotzebue Sound love sheefish. People in Kivalina love the trout. People in Point Hope seem to really love the grayling of the Kukpuk River, which is awesome. And Michael Tazorluk there allowed me to share this photo of some grayling and trout catches, which it sounds like people often go out in sort of late autumn, early winter when there's enough ice to get out to where the grayling are staging and overwintering, and then to put nets under the ice or ice fish with rod and reel, which is really cool way to harvest them. There's been, some papers, like the Fish and Game has produced some subsistence harvest survey results. And so those over the years have shown that sometimes there can be as many as 7,000 grayling, representing more than 6,000 pounds of harvested food are harvested each year. That was I'm sure it changes year to year, but that's from the study by Nikki Brame from 2017. Of course, you all know better than any study how much people are harvesting, but just putting that on there, as those are numbers that are published and out there. And the grayling are the most commonly harvested fish, behind only saffron cod, or what you call tom cod, and Arctic cod, which are sort of the blue cod, I think is the local name. When we visited for that community meeting in 2023, Michael and other folks were talking about how there was little lower catches of the grayling at that time, and also the water quality was a little bit different. The water was maybe a little bit different in color. There was more algae and things in the water. So this piqued our interest and kind of launched into this study to look at what's going on with the Kukpuk River grayling and what's their status now. So what we looked at is we looked through this satellite imagery, and it's a really cool data set that's available since 2016. You can go onto this website and you can look at satellite imagery almost weekly during the summertime these different areas. And so we did that, and we found up to 5 of those rusty seeps that actually poured out this orange water into the Kukpuk River, and then actually discolored the water for sometimes kilometers, miles downstream. And of course, this potentially has an effect on the grayling and their food and the water quality. There's been some studies, which I note here, O'Donnell et al. 2024, down in the Kukpuk drainage, that show that these rusty seeps can actually, they're kind of acidic and they have a lot of metals in them, and they can actually kill the invertebrates, the bugs that the fish eat in there, and they also, make the fish in the area sort of want to leave the area. They don't want to spend time in there because it's hard for them to see and to eat their prey. There's not so much prey because the prey doesn't like it either, the invertebrates, and that acidic water is not healthy for the fish. So what we wanted to know, now that we saw that there was these up to 5 seeps in the upper Kukpuk River, are these seeps affecting the grayling? Are the metals that are released? Now this is from permafrost thaw, so it's like those riverbanks that slump in, and the heat from the sun is melting the ice underneath, and then all of this sediment and metals that are just naturally in the ground get put into the river, and then now you get all these bacteria and microbes that help that sort of are helping cause that rusty color, that really bright red color, bright orange color, because they are able to basically feed off those metals and nutrients that are being poured in. And so, yeah, the studies that have been done, there haven't been too many yet, have shown that this is pretty bad for bugs and potentially for fish, but there has been less studies on the fish. And we see this a lot in the Woolwich River drainage too. The Fish and Game has been, and the Red Dog Mine has been monitoring this a lot. There's some of these seeps in the upper Kivalina River, and then a lot throughout the Brooks Range. But there's years where they're really bad and years where they're not so bad, and it all depends on how warm the summer is, basically. People have been seeing a lot of these since about 2018, although there was, kind of adventure folks that spent a lot of time in the Brooks Range that have seen it before then. But that 2018 to 2020 was when it really started getting noticed, and when there was a lot of news articles and studies that began looking at these rusty seeps. But of course, nobody's really looked at these ones in the Kukpuk River, so we're part of our study is actually seeing how often these seeps are running and how much of the river they're discoloring, and we'll present some of those results today. And then, of course, the main point of this study was to look at in the grayling meat, are any of these metals that are being released from the seeps getting into the meat, going through the food chain, and do people have anything to worry about? Mainly what we worry about as far as those metals is mercury, which is a naturally occurring metal, but if there's too much of it in wild foods, it can be harmful for like sensitive populations, it's called, which is pregnant women, breastfeeding mothers, and children. Mercury at high levels can disrupt development of young people. So that's what we're always looking at is mercury. The other metals that we looked at were also like iron, cadmium, nickel. Those are more like, some of those are actually beneficial. Iron, we need that for our blood and that sort of thing. But we can use that for comparison by looking at other rivers. So, the Kukpuk River, we have data from the sediment, fish, and that sort of thing about iron and zinc and what's normal there, and we can compare that with the Kukpuk. So that was the idea, to see how much of an effect these seeps were having on the environment and the grayling. Now here's some examples of the rusty seeps in the upper Kukpuk, and this is from that satellite imagery I talked about. This is from imagery from August 2020, and 2020 was kind of the worst year for these seeps. All 5 of the seeps that we noticed were flowing. So if you look at the top right, you should be able to see that the river there just kind of looks black or blue, if you can follow my pointer where it's going, where it says clear water. And then all of a sudden at this point here, you see the river just goes bright orange, and it stays orange all the way through this image downstream as far as you can see, basically, which is a few miles. So that's a pretty dramatic one there, and there's something coming out of the permafrost there, one of those little seeps, those creeks that come in, that causes that, and obviously that's very bad for any invertebrates and fish that are in that area. I'll show another example. This is a different one also in the upper Kukpuk. So the river is flowing from bottom right to sort of top left, and it does this big bend here, pretty far up in the Kukpuk. So you'll notice if you follow my pointer, it's clear, kind of dark water, blue water, until you hit this point here where these ridges come in, this little tributary, and then all of a sudden it's this yellowish color. and it goes down all the way through the image. So that's another dramatic one there. And I'll show one other example. This is the upstreammost one. It's all the way up near Mount Kelly. It's probably, I don't know how much grayling get up this far. Those previous two were down in areas where there's likely grayling spending time. But this one's pretty high up. So if you see my pointer on the top right section here, this is clear water. And then all of a sudden right here where these bluffs are, it turns bright orange and it goes for a long ways, miles and miles, this orange water. So very dramatic. This is all from that August 2020 time period. And I'll show you kind of over the years what we're seeing too coming up because it changes. Okay, hold on a moment. Okay, once this image comes up. Okay, so this is an example of what it looks like. We don't have any pictures from the ground on the Kukpuk River, but this is from the upper Noatak River. A friend, colleague allowed me to share this image, Joseph Spencer from Fish and Game. So this is what some of that orange seep can look like. And as you notice, you got this beautiful clear Noatak portion on the right-hand side, and then this yucky orange water coming in. Obviously, any fish in here, it's going to be really tough for them to see other fish, see their prey, see where they're going. So they don't like to be in there. And this water has been tested to be acidic, so it's bad for the bugs and the smaller fish too, like the sculpins that can be important food for other fish and birds. So that's what we're talking about here. That's what we would see on the Kukpuk if we were on the ground during when these seeps were happening. So in the Kukpuk, over time, this is the length of period we have the satellite imagery from. It started in sort of August 2016, and then till the present day. Well, obviously, we don't know what's happening in 2026 just yet, because these seeps really happen a lot in late July through early September. So we don't know what this year will bring yet. But you can see here, so the green means there was no seeps. Sort of that yellowish color means there was just one seep going, and then the orange means there was more than one seep. And then there was like pretty major river discoloration because of that. So in 2016 and 2017, there were no seeps. 2018 and 2019, that uppermost seep by Mount Kelly was going a little bit. Not too bad, though. Then in 2020, there was all those different ones. All 5 of the seeps were going. 2021 must have been kind of a cooler summer, and so only one was happening. 2022 was pretty major, too. A lot of the seeps were going. 2023, there was 2 of them. And then the recent 2 summers, 24 and 25, there's only been 1, which has been that one way up high near Mount Kelly. So obviously it changes a lot. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but it's presumed that things will get warmer up here and that this will be more of a regular occurrence. But we'll see what happens in 2026. But this is just so people know what kind of how intense those seeps have been happening in the river, and maybe folks have noticed that if they've been on the water in August and September, those years where it was really bad, they probably did notice the discoloration, and that could have certainly affected grayling during certain years. So for our actual fieldwork investigation, we flew into the upper North River, or Ipswich River. Actually, it wasn't that high up. It was just downstream of this confluence here. That was about as far as we could go up, where the river was still floatable when we flew in July 2025. The rivers were somewhat low, so we needed to be able to go in and be able to have enough water to float down. Then we also went in about 100 miles upstream on the Kukpuk, 100 miles from Marriott Inlet, which was just downstream of where all these orange seeps occur. It would have been ideal to actually float this section where the seeps are, but the river is just too small up there, and the landing area is too limited for the bush planes for us to get in there at the time. But everything flows downriver, so I think we got a very close screenshot where we should have been able to pick up any effects of those seeps over that happen over time and might affect the grayling. So those are the sections we floated. We caught grayling with angling and using gill nets, and then we collected invertebrates from the fish stomachs. We also collected sediment, just dirt from the riverbank, to look at that. And then Michael picked us up in Marriott Inlet each time to take us back over to Point Hope, where we flew out again from there. And so I'll show some photos from the fieldwork. So this was the North River, or Ipswich River. We landed there in really nice weather, and it was a nice landing strip up here, just downstream of that big tributary coming in, a little bit upstream of, I think, Muktuk Mountain is what it's called, the area there. So it was myself and Carl here, who is a volunteer on the project, and we flew in with all our gear, our tents, and our little boats, which I'll show you photos of. They're setting up camp for the first time. You can see Carl's little pack raft there, which are really cool. They weigh about 7 pounds, and you can fit all your gear in them. And in some, like his, you can actually have a zipper on the tube of the raft, and you can put things inside of the tube of the raft itself, like your tent and that sort of thing. And then this one on the right, you can see here the grayish one behind my tent is bigger. And so that was sort of our gear boat where we put our nets and our heavier gear. This one's about, I think about 20 pounds. So it's a little harder to backpack around, a little bulkier, but it was perfect for being dropped off here and for this low water. You know, these small rafts can go over really shallow water, and they're easy to pull if we did find a lot of areas where we had to kind of drag the boats through shallow riffles. It was getting going in the boat. You can see it loaded down. We had quite a bit of gear for the sampling and for camping and being out there. The North River float, I believe we did in about 5 days, and then the full Kukpuk River float we did, I believe, in 7 days. So we had quite a bit of food and gear with us, and we were filtering water from the river as we went down. Here's coming down the North River. We did a lot of fishing and looking for grayling. And as you guys know, grayling, you'll pretty much know if they're there because they jump out of the water after bugs and that sort of thing. And we didn't see any grayling activity to start. Maybe we weren't far enough upriver, or maybe, you know, there just didn't seem like there was any grayling in the area when we were there. And that was kind of a theme as we did this trip, is that grayling seemed to be very patchily distributed. You'll go miles and miles without seeing any grayling in the summer here on the Kukpuk and the North River, and then all of a sudden you'll find a big group of them. So we were expecting them to be more kind of distributed all the way throughout the river, but it was kind of a surprise that we didn't find much on the North River. And we floated the North River because we thought, since there's no rusty seeps in that river, collecting the dirt and the grayling and the bugs from this river would be a good comparison to what's happening on the Kukpuk. But unfortunately, we never caught any grayling in the North River. You know, we were just there at the wrong time, or we just didn't quite hit the right places. The weather was great right now, right here, but it sort of turned on us, and we had a pretty rainy, miserable last couple days on the river. One really cool thing we saw here on the left, you'll see this on the left-hand side, is there must have been thousands of caribou that were crossing the river just before us. We saw tracks all over the bank and this actual like bathtub ring of caribou hair. I'd never seen this before in my life. This is amazing. Just so much caribou must have crossed that river that there must have been just hair floating down the river, and then it, when the water receded, the hair was up along this river line here. So pretty amazing. We saw lots of wildlife, including this cute little fox kit here. Just only saw one caribou near Muktuk Mountain, and we saw some bear and wolf tracks, but didn't see any of them in person. This was on the North River. There's a lot of this sort of section where it's super shallow. You can't, even with these little pack rafts, we weren't able to float through, so we did end up doing quite a bit of walking. But the water looked great, and lots of great places for grayling to hang out, but we just didn't find any on this trip. Especially a hole like this looks perfect for trout or grayling. You know, they often would be sitting in here feeding, but no bites. And then when we would camp in the evening, I would put out the gill net and check that in a likely spot, and no grayling. We did catch one chum salmon pretty far up the North River, which was kind of a surprise. And we took some clips of its fin to send to the Fish and Game Genetics Laboratory. They wanted us to collect information from these salmon this far north because they didn't have basically on file those genetic fin clips from these fish. And the idea behind that for them is that if there's a big commercial catch, you know, in the Bering Sea or something, they could tell based on the genetics of those chum salmon where they're coming from, which population. So they could test maybe some of the tissue of one of those salmon, and they could say, oh, this one came from the Kukpuk River, this one came from the Yukon River, this one came from the Ipawik River, the North River. But it seems like there's only a few chum salmon in the North River, more of them down on the main Kukpuk. We got down into this canyon here, which you kind of get into before the North River joins the main Kukpuk. And here we were getting some poor weather, lots of wind blowing upriver. There's points where we just had to walk the rafts down because the wind was blowing so hard. You know, we would just paddle as hard as we could, but we weren't making any progress. So that was kind of tough going. And then Carl, the volunteer, had a little problem where his rain gear and his tent were not particularly waterproof, and so he was getting a little bit cold. But he toughed it out, and we made it down okay. But yeah, we were kind of discouraged by the fact that we were not able to collect grayling. However, we went ahead and collected the sediment samples, which were important too. There's Carl. He's still in a good mood, but he's pretty wet here. This is getting down lower on the main Kukpuk, I believe, and getting down towards the inlet where we're going to get picked up. And right before we joined the Kukpuk, we found this big, deep hole. You guys are probably familiar with this. It's like maybe, I don't know, a mile up from the confluence with the Kukpuk on the North River. And we actually found these beaver-chewed sticks, fresh beaver-chewed sticks, which kind of blew us away because we had no idea the beavers were coming this far out into Northwest Alaska. After this trip, we did send the sightings to a research group at UAF, and they were surprised that we had seen these beavers all the way this far north and west. And so that was an important data point for them to add as they study how the beavers are moving out into the tundra, because there's a lot of concerns from residents, right? The beavers can change the creeks with their dams, and there might be effects for fish and for boating. So people are really interested in this. Of course, talking to residents in Point Hope, people already knew there was beavers and now more otters, it sounds like, here too. But this was news to the scientists, us, and others in Fairbanks. So that was a good sighting to add. This is one of the fish camps on the way down the river. One of the big cliffy areas where it sounds like it's important for fishing in the wintertime and for caribou hunting. And then getting down into the estuary. So there was kind of crazy. There was all these jellyfish floating around pretty far up into the river, farther than you would think. So that was wild to see. But we made it down into the estuary, and Michael picked us up near, I think, what's called Gull Island. And I guess we kind of went down not the best channel because it's a little shallow, and it's not the usual one that people boat down to. So the next time when we floated the Kukpuk, we went to a different one, kind of where the outlet of Marriott Inlet is. It was pretty cold and yucky, but Michael was amazing and came out and picked us up and brought us back to town before our next flight up to the upper Kukpuk. Yeah, and then so here's landing on the upper Kukpuk. We went up as far as we could, where it was still floatable. And even here we had to drag the rafts across gravel bars quite a bit. For this one, I had a different volunteer named Jean, and so Carl flew back to Fairbanks, and Jean came in from Fairbanks. And we started our float up here, and immediately we were seeing grayling rise. So we were so excited because the previous trip on the North River had been kind of a bust in the fact that we weren't able to sample any fish, but we were excited when we could see that there was grayling just right at the start there, pretty far up in the river. This is like 100 some miles up from, river miles from the Marriott Inlet. And so that seemed to be where the fish were at. Here's Gene with a grayling, and this particular bend here, which was on our second day of the trip, was very fruitful. There was a ton of grayling here. We caught quite a few with spinning rod and fly rod, and good sized fish. This is about as big as they got, so not giant, but very good sized. The bigger fish are good because they live long enough, maybe even 20 years, some of them, that we can get an idea of contaminants over time. And just the small ones, we would sort of just know within the last couple of years what's happening. But with these bigger ones, we can get a longer term picture. So we were collecting the grayling and taking out their ear bones and then a little bit of meat to test for the contaminants. The ear bones, you can cut them down and polish them, and it looks like tree rings, and you can actually count the years of the fish's life, how long they lived. And then we were also shooting a laser across that ear bone, it's called an otolith, to see if the levels of metals, iron, cadmium, mercury, that sort of thing, increased over different years. So we could try to match and see if those rusty seeps were causing spikes in the metals that the fish were taking in over time. Some more pictures of floating down the Kukpuk with our little rafts. Some of the grayling we were catching, that was kind of the typical size. A lot of them would bite the floating flies here, as you can see, this feathery fly. That's grayling are known for that. They like to leap out of the water and bite those, so it's fun to catch them. And doing a little bit of gill net sets, we did catch some more chum salmon lower down in the Kukpuk, which we took fin clips for and released them, as well as some pink salmon too. But the grayling are in that clear water. The grayling can avoid the nets pretty well, so angling was the better method. There's a campsite we did. This is getting kind of lower down in the Kukpuk, those mountains. I forget the name of this mountain here in the background. It starts with an S, I believe, but it's on the maps. And We saw some folks driving around with ATVs here, out caribou hunting and whatnot. It was kind of a major crossing point, it looked like, for people. But yeah, this turned out to be a great float. The weather was pretty good, and we collected a lot of grayling, as much as we hoped to. We collected about 24 in total, which we hope to get a few more samples from Michael and others to kind of do a little more testing. But that's a decent sample size for the size of the river and the objectives that we were trying to hit. Saw some musk oxen along the river, which is very cool. A whole big herd of them there. And then down in this pool, I don't know if folks recognize this, but this is it's maybe like a mile upstream of where the North River comes in. We actually saw a live beaver. So it was swimming around with some tree branches and stuff. And I got a video of it, which I posted on the Point Hope Facebook. Some people might have seen that, slapping its tail and swimming around. And so this was another important beaver sighting. But yeah, it was interesting to see. If anybody is interested in that actual location and the video and that sort of thing, you can reach out to me, or it's on that Point Hope Facebook post from July of last year, 2025. Here's catching some grayling. So we found a lot up at that 100-mile mark on the Kukpuk, and then there was some around maybe mile 72 or something, and then down here on the lower Kukpuk, actually a bunch of them had shown up by one of the fish camps. I forget the name of this camp, but there's a bunch of cabins on the right-hand side as you're going downriver by these cliffs. And we pulled in here and we could see some fish rising, and so we were able to collect some more samples here. And we found some more salmon too, lower down on the Kukpuk, the pink salmon on the right and the chum salmon on the left, which we took fin clips for. We caught them in the net, as you can see on the left there, and then also even with the fishing rod, the pink salmon on the right. So hopefully Fish and Game will find those fin clips useful. The way you do that is you take the clip and you let it dry in this box with sort of silica beads, and then we mailed it off to Fish and Game Genetic Laboratory, and they'll be able to run different tests on it, and hopefully it'll be useful for them. This is down on the lower Kukpuk before the inlet, kind of a foggy morning, really spooky looking and beautiful. We saw some caribou and running around at that point. And then we got down to near the lagoon outlet, Merritt Inlet outlet, and we just hung out there for half the day waiting for Michael to come pick us up. We had a lot better weather on this trip, although it was kind of choppy and windy, so Michael got bounced around a lot in his boat when he came to get us, but we were just here briefly. We just set up the tents for wind shelter, and that kind of wrapped up our trip. We came back to Point Hope and shipped everything back to Fairbanks, getting picked up. So a recap of the work: we collected 24 grayling and 20 sediment samples from the Kukpuk and the sediment also from the Kukpuk River, North River. We analyzed the muscle tissue, which is what people care about, right? Because that's mainly what people are eating on these grayling, for concentrations of mercury and also iron, zinc, nickel, copper, and cadmium, because these were the metals that one of the papers, the scientific papers from the Kukpuk River, O'Donnell et al. 2024, indicated were elevated in the water from these resting seeps. So we wanted to test that in the grayling and in the sediment. And then, as I mentioned, we took those fish ear bones and we analyzed for the metals over their lifetime on those. We reported the beaver sightings, and then we took some of those salmon clips. So overall, this was a very successful trip, and huge thanks to Michael and other people in Point Hope for putting us up at different bunkhouses, picking us up from the river, giving us advice on where to sample and what to look for. So thank you all. We really enjoyed working with you all on this, and hope that the results are useful for the community too, which I'll get into the results shortly. So in the lab, we basically ground up the muscle tissue, so it's kind of like a milkshake, a grayling milkshake, and then sent it off to an external laboratory in California to get all the analyses done. Those otoliths on the left-hand side, those are the fish ear bones, and you sort of slice them in half and really thinly, and then you can get at I'll show you a photo of what they look like later. So the most important results, the mercury concentrations in the grayling muscle tissue. Those black dots there, those are all, each one of those is one of the fish from the Kukpuk River, the 24 that we were able to analyze. And mercury is on the y-axis on this graph, going from 0 to 250 micrograms per kilogram. That's total mercury. And you'll see there's a red line dashed line up near the top, and that's the state of Alaska consumption guideline threshold. So if fish have more mercury in their tissues than that level, then you're recommended, if you're a pregnant woman, nursing mother, or child, to limit your consumption of fish. And even at that red level, it's still, they say, oh, no more than 16 meals per month of fish. And then there's more levels above that go up quite a ways. And 16 meals a month per fish is a lot. I certainly don't eat that many meals of fish per month, but some people do, of course. So just keep that in mind, that's a very low guideline threshold. So anything below that 200 microgram per kilogram is unlimited. There's no, it's really healthy for you. There's no worries about mercury for anybody. And you can see that all those black dots are really low, like way down there, nice and low. So the takeaway from this for mercury is that these grayling in the Kukpuk are incredibly healthy and safe to eat for people. They're even below the average concentration we saw in the Kukpuk River, which is that green dashed line there. So super healthy. It seems that those rusty seeps are not affecting the river to such a degree that the grayling have taken up the mercury anyway into their tissue. But as you guys probably know, the mercury can accumulate over time. So there's been, since we caught these grayling, there was like 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. So that's about 7 years of those seeps happening. But as the seeps go for longer, there could be more cumulative buildup of metals. And so in the future, it could rise up a little bit if those seeps continue to happen. But right now, everything's looking great. Maybe in 10, 15 years, it would be useful to assess the grayling again and see if there's any changes, but it looks really good. Good for the mercury in particular. Here's a couple other metals. I didn't put them all on the graphs or anything, but the two important ones, copper in the orange and then zinc in the gray on that graph over there. And those dashed lines are the average for those metals that we saw in grayling in the Kukpuk River. And you can see that for copper and for zinc, the Kukpuk River grayling, which are all those orange and gray dots, were mostly right on the average line. So it doesn't appear that those rusty seeps are really elevating those levels of metals in the fish tissue, which is good. I'm not presenting any of the sediment results or the otolith results yet, because those are still in progress. I just focused on the fish results because that's what people really care about to share with you guys today. But we plan to put together a brochure once all the information is pulled together sometime this winter, I'm hoping, and get that information out to the community. I'll mail out maybe 100 brochures that go through all this information to Michael, and hopefully he can get it out to anybody who's interested, or we'll have them available online too. But I wanted to, get this information out there well before your fishing season in the fall and everything. And, really happy to report that it seems like the grayling are very healthy for people to eat. That's kind of the limit of what we studied. Obviously, it would have been nice to do some more studies about the population level and other things with the grayling behavior. I think there would be some really interesting stories there, but because of the funding levels that we got, we just picked kind of the most important thing that we thought was worth looking at, which was the metals in the tissue. We weren't able to really study their movements or their population levels, but that's something that's possible in the future if there's interest from the community and we can get that funded. Michael did notice, or talk about to me that over the years, the population seems to go up and down. And we did notice last year when we went out there that there weren't any of those really whopper grayling, the giant ones around 20 inches long. It was more ones that were up to like 15 inches or so. So it seems like maybe at some point it could have been a die-off of the age group of those really big grayling, but there's a lot of young grayling. And so that's a good thing. It means that the population is up and coming and should be good for the future as far as we can tell, just looking briefly. But something to look at. Another thing we can look at with those fish ear bones is we can actually tell if the fish throughout their lives experience things like low oxygen levels, which we call hypoxia, which is one of the common ways that fish die in the winter. They get stuck under the ice, and the oxygen levels down there, the oxygen isn't being dissolved into the water because the ice is preventing that, and that can eventually, late through the winter, cause fish to die off if there's not enough oxygen. So we can actually investigate that too with the data we've collected, but it's just a little bit lower on the priority list than the metals. But we'll certainly look into that. And if there's any interesting things, like it looks like these fish, on a certain year really struggled with hypoxia or something, we'll report that back to the community. Okay. So our next steps are to analyze those fish ear bones for the increases in the trace metals and maybe the hypoxia. And you can see a photo of what those otoliths look like when after they're prepared for the aging. You can see every ring there is basically a winter of the fish's life. The fish are not growing as fast in the wintertime because they're not eating as much. And so you get this really narrow, dark band for winters. And then during the summer when they're feeding, it's those lighter gaps and bands. So you're able to tell how old the fish is. And also you can see those grooves that are cut into the otolith there. That's the path of the laser. So it shoots through. And then you can tell over the years of the fish's life, what the levels are of these trace metals, which are from the fish's diet and also from the water that it's moving through its gills. That gets incorporated into this. It's a calcium carbonate structure and gets basically locked in there. And so you can tell over the fish's life what's been going on with that. So that's a little bit experimental. We'll continue to look into that. We've already run most of these samples at UAF with the lasers, and we have the data. We just need to start analyzing the data, which will be a pretty big task. That'll probably be a lot of what I'll be working on this fall and this winter before I get the results back to the community. We'll continue to track the activity of those rusty seeps by satellite imagery up in the upper Kukpuk. Starting with, I guess, this September, we'll look and see what was going on from July through September in 2026, and we'll keep doing that into the future too, just because it's not too difficult for us to do that. It's all free, and it just takes a little bit of time. So we'll keep tracking that for the community, and if there's interest, we can take this in a couple different ways. We'll also work on summarizing and publishing these findings that we have so far. And so we'll get that out in the form of brochures, as I mentioned, and probably in the form of some reports and scientific papers and that sort of thing. But that might not be as much of interest for the community, except for those are nice things to reference because, it's something that's on the record, I guess. But sometimes those are difficult to read through and interpret. So I'll make sure we get out information that's easy for the community to digest and share. Okay. So that's pretty much the presentation. I hope this was really interesting to folks, and I'm glad to report about the results of the contaminants in the grayling, or the metals in the grayling. Looks like everything's really, really good and normal. So that's great to hear. I'd like to thank our people who helped us out and funded this project. That includes the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, the BLM who funded this, the North Slope Borough, Michael Tazorluk and Todd Swarmo, who have helped with logistics and kind of coordinating the community meetings and activities. And just really want to thank all the people of Point Hope who've been so friendly and helpful as we've been doing our field work, coming out for our meetings. And I'm just really, every time I visit your community, I'm really blown away by how friendly people are, how involved and interested they are in scientific work and in the fish and the wildlife that are, those important wild foods. So it's been a privilege to come out to Point Hope and to work on these projects, and I hope we can do more together that's useful for the community and of interest to you all. If you are interested in checking out more about our organization or our work, feel free to scan that QR code, and you should be able to find my email and contact information in there anyway. And we are, if you have some ideas about things you want to see, because we weren't able to do, we also wanted to do this community forum where people could talk about what they've been seeing with fish, with beavers, with anything like that. Please reach out to us if you have ideas or questions about other studies or things that you want to know about with these fish, and we can maybe work on funding more projects. I think there's a lot more to look at with the grayling, particularly where they go, what their population levels are. And so if that's of interest, definitely reach out. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great summer.